Welcome to Dare, the show for innovators, entrepreneurs, and startup leaders who dare to shape the future. Your hosts today are Ned Hayes and Cecilia Mariani. Dare is brought to you by Darwaf, the superpower tech team that can make your vision a reality. Today, the Dare Show welcomes Cara Turano to the podcast. She's the executive director for the Oregon Entrepreneurs Network, where she helps to mentor and nurture entrepreneurs, startup leaders, and innovative small businesses who craft their product vision, define their target markets, and eventually achieve success. Cara has a remarkable history of success herself, and in this interview, we'll hear about her leadership experience helping to run the Technology Association of Oregon, and now where the Oregon Entrepreneurs Network is going. And we even talk about running and some of the personal challenges that she creates for herself. So welcome, Cara.
Hi, good to be here.
Welcome to the Dare podcast, Cara. Could you set the stage by telling us about the mission of the Oregon Entrepreneur Network?
Yeah, and I'm really excited to do that because this is the first podcast I've done since we changed it. So we've edited the mission and we just rolled it out. So OEN's mission is to build and strengthen Oregon and Southwest Washington's early stage entrepreneurs. So that's like a very defining phrase, that early stage, to provide them education, guidance, connections, and access to financial opportunities to impel increasing economic impact throughout the region. And we're doing that all in service because we envision a robust, diverse, and collaborative entrepreneurial economy across Oregon and Southwest Washington.
Wow, that's fantastic. So the network has a long history. Could you give us a little bit of what that history is?
Yeah, absolutely. So the organization was founded over 30 years ago and was really centered on tech, in particular the semiconductor industry that is so relevant here in the Portland metro area. And much like a lot of other pioneering spirits out here in Oregon, it went from a monthly lunch where an exited entrepreneur shared their success story to pub talks, to supporting youth in entrepreneurship, to creating a venture fund, to doing all of these things, and was really the first organization supporting entrepreneurs in the state and was the only one for a really long time, which is pretty cool because when you look at some of the names of companies that are still here, or that are doing well and succeeding at the Technology Association of Oregon or the Oregon Bio Association, a lot of them had some connection to OEN at some point. So for 30 plus years, we've been celebrating entrepreneurs. And I think it took me like working here to realize that that is an economic development mission. Like we're really, truly helping to like create jobs and businesses and grow the economy here in the state.
So tell us more. Who are some of the remarkable business successes that originated at the Oregon Entrepreneur Network?
I love this question because I'm doing a research project on every company we've invested in over the course of the last like 20 years. And so I went back to OEN's very first Angel Oregon investment, which is an organic pet food company called Castor and Pollux. And in my tracking sheet, the fund is closed. And so I was like, well, what happened to this company? Well, Castor and Pollux is still open, still running in Portland, still employing people in Portland. And in 2012, it was acquired by Merrick, a pet food company out of Austin, Texas. So that was 7 years after OEN made their investment. And in 2015, Merrick was acquired by Purina. So now Castor and Pollux, based here in Portland, Oregon, is a Purina brand. And I think that is just such an exceptional story. AWS Elemental is part of the OEN network. Wild Fang is approved. Open Sesame is another one that I think that OEN should brag about. They invested $185,000 in Open Sesame back in 2011. And last year, Open Sesame closed a $50 million D round. So that is really exciting. I mean, I could keep going on and on. Honey Mama, I think at one point was a part of OEN. Brazzy Bites. So there's just a wide variety of companies that we've seen come through. And I tell people you should really probably only hang out with OEN for 3 years, because at that point you've gotten too big to really be a part of our support structure anymore.
Wow. So you have a kind of laser focus on that early stage, right?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. So how will the organization continue to grow and thrive? Will that mission expand, or is that mission in that particular area really enough for the organization?
I think it's where OEN fills the best gap. So you have your small business development centers that are going to really help folks that are like, I have a business idea, like put together a plan and, maybe help you get your LLC. And then I say that we support the entrepreneurial miasma until you maybe get your seed or your Series A. And so the longer history of OEN has really been about like the focus on capital. And I think the way that we're reframing that is really the focus on growth. And what does growth look like for you? And what's the type of business you're trying to build? And how can OEN help you on that journey? And maybe you're on the path with OEN for a while, but we may not be the right organization for every founder, but we can at least point you in the right direction. And so I do think it's enough. That's one of the things that's fascinating to me about this organization as a nonprofit. A lot of nonprofits have a goal of like ending childhood cancer or, saving whales. And it's like, well, we support entrepreneurs. And in theory, that's evergreen. There will never not be somebody starting another business. And so if we grow with our entrepreneurs into their next business stage, then who's here to support the early stage folks?
Yeah. So if you could jump ahead 5 to 10 years from now, what does OEM look like then? What future do you dare to dream for the organization?
Oh, I love daring to dream a big future. So part of the strategy about 6 years ago was to support the industries that the state of Oregon views as high growth. And so that's where you see us supporting life and bioscience, tech, and food. I would love to see the organization have the capacity to really do that in a year-long basis instead of just like a programmatic few months here and there. I think it would be cool to add support for athletic and outdoor. And I would really like to see the organization being that first stop for entrepreneurs statewide. So whether you're in Eastern Oregon or on the coast, OEN is a part of that growth journey for you as a business founder.
Mm-hmm.
But we live in a really big state.
Right. There's a lot of variety in this state, right? So like some of the companies you listed earlier, that ranges all the way from highly technical cloud-based products down to, like you said, cat chow, right?
Yeah.
So could you tell us more about a little bit of that breadth of entrepreneurial vision in the state of Oregon? I mean, that's different than some places like Silicon Valley, right?
Yeah. I think that when the state set up their vision, it was really like, what do we do well? Like what are the areas that we've been thriving? And so 2 of the other areas are forest products and manufacturing. And that's just not something that OEM needs to support, because there are other organizations that does that. And part of why I think that's so special is we are a community that is then willing to support those businesses that are at least food-based, and I think tech-based too. Like we value the people that work here and that want to have their businesses headquartered here, because I don't know that Oregon is always the easiest state to run a business. Mm-hmm. And so I think that breadth is just really critical, because we don't like own the market on anything. Like we don't own food and beverage. We don't own life and bioscience. We don't own tech. So if we can support those early stage entrepreneurs to get their early investment here, and then other investment comes from outside, like I think we're doing a really good job of setting that stage well, mm-hmm. with that breadth of support.
Right. That's a great vision, that you're able to support these entrepreneurs And you've also taken us into the future of OEN and where the startup world is going in the state of Oregon, right? So maybe after we've looked into the future, we could go the other direction. Could you tell us a little bit about what you did before you took over the leadership role at OEN?
Yeah, I like to tell people I started in tech, but I didn't even own a computer. And so I was the 17th employee at a software engineering company that was a great service provider that grew to 300 people and multiple regional offices, and then was acquired by a $12 billion consultancy. So I sort of fell into startup life. And I did that. I was with that company for close to 9 years, maybe 9 years. And then they were acquired. And then I was like, oh, tech startups are fun. And then I learned that painful lesson that like 1 in 10 businesses succeed. And I had been at one in my first job that was a success. And so going right into another super successful tech company was probably not a reality. So I did a couple more tech startups, and then I started working in the tech association world. So kind of the 501c6 nonprofit, doing advocacy, really hyper focused on how do you diversify the tech industry. But I always I came at that association work with the perspective of someone that had been at startups for the first 15 years of their career. So like I never really lost kind of that startup entrepreneurial flavor. And then I was recruited out to Oregon by Skip Newberry at TAO, and I worked with him for 3 years doing more of that later stage tech company support, thinking about workforce and employee retention and gosh, I think we used to call it future of work strategies. And now I'm like, the future of work is I'm in my house with my dog bed. And I did that until the beginning of 2022. And then I took a small sabbatical. And so really like my whole career has been in and around tech, and joining OEN has really been a little bit of a stretch in terms of my skill set, because I didn't know anything about raising money for a life sciences company or what the exit strategy should look like for food innovators. So this has been a really it's been a growth opportunity after all of those years in just the technology sector.
Mm.
So, as you said, you helped to lead the Technology Association of Oregon for several years as COO. So, how is TAO different from the organization you are currently leading?
I love that question too. And Ned and I talked about this because people ask me that all the time. They're like, how are they different? And I was like, when I took this job, I actually did not know the answer to that question. And I probably should have asked a few more. So TAO is really focused on big tech companies and companies with large tech departments. And those organizations have totally different needs. Like they are looking at larger rounds of funding coming from outside the state, headquarters having to transfer, how they're going to grow a workforce, how they are going to diversify their workforce, how they're going to deal with AI as it hits their workforce and their products. And so that was really what a lot of the work was around. And there was some work at TAO supporting founders, but again, it was like those founders that had tended to get into their later stage. They were literally looking for their series B, C, and D. And at OEN, number one, it is all industries. So sometimes I get like phone calls from somebody. I got this phone call last week, and I thought it was so cool. It's this guy in Central Oregon. He's in Prineville, and he wants to buy a building to create a like restaurant, bar, venue. And he's offering the investors an opportunity. He basically like divided up the mortgage into 32 lots, and you can be an investor in this property, and he has your yearly return and then your buyout in 5 years. And I was like, this is actually like pretty innovative. Like I would have never thought about this before. And so that is just a whole different disruptor model that has nothing to do with tech that I think of as very entrepreneurial and innovative. But again, like it's not software as a service, and it's not a hardware component. And So like I have to try to figure out and think about as the leader of this organization and with this organization, like it's not just about going and finding your VC. It's potentially finding an individual angel. It's potentially finding like interesting banking and financing options. Like if you are a life sciences startup, you can't just have a schematic of what you think is going to help somebody's heart murmur. You actually have to get that approved by the FDA, and that could take 10 years. And the amount of funding you need for that looks really different. So it really is like all startup all day. And a lot of times it's people with really good ideas who are just trying to figure out how to make money with it. I mean, like, and it's just really exciting. So it is definitely not Intel. By the time people are hiring their 7th employee, they're like, okay, we're going to go join TAO. And I'm like, okay, bye. Good luck.
Kind of like they've graduated and grown up, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. We get to see them. Like, then we read about them in the business journal. And it's like, oh, do you remember when like you didn't know how to hire an accountant?
Let me kind of double down on your description of a startup, kind of being a toddler, learning how to walk, right? So what kind of special care and handling do you provide to startups that really give them those early skills?
That is such a good question. And the one thing that I've seen us do in trainings repeatedly throughout the year is like the first question we should be asking a startup founder is like, how do you want this to end? Because that really lays the groundwork for how you want to grow. It's a hard question, I think, for an entrepreneur to answer because they're just like, but I have this great idea and I just want to like pursue this great idea. And so like, that's the first step that we're trying to get them to think about. Do you want a store on Main Street? Are you an e-commerce platform? Like, do you see yourself getting acquired? Are you going to leave this business to your kids? And so when we start asking those questions, that then leads us pretty naturally to like, okay, like what's your business structure? How are you running your financials? Okay, you have that under your belt. Like, how are you going to market your product? What's your sales strategy? Okay, like how are you going to build out your team? So I almost feel like it becomes like business essentials 101. Because a lot of founders have like one area of expertise and then they don't know how to speak all those other languages of the business. And a lot of the times I think people assume I get phone calls where someone's desperate for funding. And by the time you get to OEN, if you're at the desperate for funding stage, it's probably too late. But a lot of the phone calls I get are, do you know a really good bookkeeper? Or I don't know how to set up my QuickBooks, or I need a sales strategy, but I can't hire a full-time salesperson. I've got this great resume. I'm not ready to hire. Could you maybe refer this person to someone else? So like, it really is, I call it entrepreneur therapy.
Recently, in a post on LinkedIn, you mentioned that being a startup founder can be very lonely and frustrating. Can you tell us more about that insight and what you're doing to make things better for the startup founders?
Well, we started just having like founder meetups where we have no programming and they just get to sit and talk to each other because that's really all they want to do. You know, they're looking for somebody who's explored what manufacturing in America looks like versus in Mexico. And so a lot of it is just knowing you're not alone and that your frustrations in trying to raise money or get cash positive or get on the shelf at new seasons, like you're not just doing it by yourself. And so we've just created these 1.5-hour meetups around the city where folks can just talk. And next year we're looking at more of a peer cohort model. Like how can you find someone at the same business stage as you, potentially industry, who can give you some of that, yeah, I know what you're going through, and have you tried this? And then the other part of that, and this is like also some of that future vision, is once someone's really successful, how do we get them to come back and provide, if not that mentorship, at least like the, hey, I've been in your shoes and let me tell you what my business looked like 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, so that you can know that I also was wondering how I was going to get on the shelves of New Seasons, and now I'm sold in Costco.
And what you brought you personally to focus on entrepreneurs? How do you get to the startup people?
That's such a good question. So I took a sabbatical in between my job at TAO and this job, and I volunteered with Oregon State University. They have a program that allows any student, regardless of major, to study entrepreneurship. So you can be a veterinary candidate and also learn how to be an entrepreneur, which I think is so amazing, because then they're learning some of the things that like OEN is helping them teach. And so somebody asked me at OSU if I would volunteer for that program since I was taking some time off. And I said, sure. I was like, my whole background is in tech. They're like, totally. And then they assigned me 2 students who are running consumer product companies. And it's like, I don't know anything about CPG. You're fine. You know what to do with, like, you know how to run a business. It'll be okay. And then I was really proud because one of my students wound up being in the finals after I coached and worked with her. And she was the only woman in the finals. And so she was selling an inclusive and sustainable bathing suit line. And I had a ton of fun, and I learned even more than I thought I could about what a consumer product good entrepreneur should do. And when I finished that volunteer experience, I was like, yeah, I either want to work with young people or young companies. And as I am like squarely middle age, there will be a lot more young people at some point than me. And so when the OEN opportunity came up, I was like, oh, that seems like a really good fit. Like, young companies are exciting. Young companies run by younger people is exciting. Young companies run by any age of person is exciting. I just think it's really inspiring that somebody is willing to pursue a dream that could give other people jobs. Like you've done that. Like, you've pursued this dream as an entrepreneur, and now you employ all these people, and that is very admirable.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So you and I are both female leaders in an often male-dominated tech industry. So what techniques have you used to get ahead in this industry, and how have you been successful despite of many challenges?
I don't even know how to answer that question. Like, I think that
one technique at least.
I think one thing is, and this is maybe like a stereotype or a bias, but I do think women have really good communication skills. And I feel like I'm a very good communicator, and I'm also a very empathetic leader. And I think both those things have made me very successful in my career, particularly when I was the only woman in a leadership position at a tech startup. I'm pretty process oriented, and like, I think that's been a real benefit too. But if I didn't understand something, I'm always the one. I had a boss one time, and he looked at me, he's like, I'm going to get you a t-shirt, and it is going to read, I have one question. He's like, because you always have one question. And I was like, well, that's how I clarify what I'm supposed to be doing. And being really clear is super important to me. And I've like kind of lived by this adage of words count and clarity matters. And I think that's helped me be really successful and navigate, because it is often men. You're right. Like, it is like so many men. And now I love seeing women entrepreneurs, because it is more challenging to get funding. And that was like an experience I lived when I was coaching my OSU student. I was like, look, you're going to be in a room full of men, and they are not going to understand why a woman's bathing suit is anything that they would ever invest in. And I was like, so it's going to be like 10 times harder for you. So like, let's think about why it would be compelling to them. Like, what are the margins? Like, how does it win? I think it's sometimes speaking another language, but I'm going to just peg it on my wonderful communication skills and my ability to make myself look bigger in the room when I wave my arms.
Yeah, so in some cases, we need more preparation, right? To better communicate our ideas and our plans.
Totally.
Thanks for sharing that, Cara. I also know that you challenge yourself personally outside of work with running, long distance hiking. So what about running makes you excited? Any tie-in into your kind of motivation at work or at OEN?
Yeah, it's funny that you asked that. I ran the Portland Marathon last year, and actually, like, that was a moment at the finish line. And I looked at my husband, and I was like, why do we only reward the people that finish in the top 3. Like,
Mm-hmm.
hasn't everybody that's gone through this journey of training for and running a marathon learned something really important about discipline and planning and perseverance? And like, it's the same thing with entrepreneurship. Like, maybe you're not the unicorn of the city, but you learn a ton by just going through that journey. And it is a marathon. Like, it is, you have your milestones, your goals, you kind of like train for it. So I think that if you are a distance athlete or challenging yourself physically, you're bringing a lot back to your community. And I feel the same way about entrepreneurs. And I think it's just as hard to be an entrepreneur, but you're less likely to wind up like with a stress fracture running your business.
Well, that's an interesting metaphor. Yeah. Yeah. Well, Cecilia and I have actually gone hiking together in Argentina. We both like to get outdoors. So, along with running, I mean, you recently came back from the Enchantments. For those who don't know, is this amazing wilderness area. It's up in the Northern Cascades. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey up there?
Yeah, last year I decided I was gonna. So for those of you that are not familiar, you're supposed to hike up, camp up there, and then come back down. But you have to get a permit, and so there's 2,500 permits a year, and 45,000 people apply for them. Or you can start at 5 a.m. and go from one end of the trail to the other in a day. So I did it last year. Last year I ran it. And it was amazing. And I was like, wow, what a cool experience. I was very sore. And I said, I will never do that again. And then this year, many of my friends and myself included became empty nesters. And we thought, what can we do to distract ourselves from the fact that we don't have any teenagers around? And so someone said, Cara, you should lead us through the Enchantments. And I laughed out loud and said, I'm never doing that again. And then lo and behold, I was up at 3:30 a.m. on Friday morning, cooking breakfast in a parking lot so that we could start at 5:30 in the morning. And 7 of us went, it wound up being like 22 and a half miles over 13 and a half hours. And I think a grand total of like 7,000 total feet of vertical elevation that we climbed. And it was amazing. And it's just like that challenge, that physical challenge and of being able to do something like that and just feeling so fortunate. And oddly enough, there was an entrepreneur from Bend on my trip, and she was thinking about what to do with her hat company. And she was like, can I hire you as a consultant? I was like, no, just pay $95 for an OEN membership and you can get all of my ideas for free.
Yeah, well, that sounds amazing. So
It's
what
amazing.
are in your plans for the future for hiking or runs? Maybe in Oregon or outside Oregon, maybe in Argentina. You never know.
I mean, I didn't look at Argentina, but I did on an article in the New York Times that there is an 84-mile trail that goes from Bologna to Florence in Italy. And I am Italian and I want to spend some time there. And
Wow.
it's apparently a 6-day, I'm like 6 days, 84 miles. It's like 12 to 14 miles a day. I'm like, that's not terrible after what we just did. But you like hike into all these teeny tiny towns that you can't get to really otherwise, that tourists would never go to. And the kicker of the article said that it was the only multi-day hike that this hiker had ever been on where she came home and weighed more because of all the Italian food. And I was like, that's the hike I want to do next.
Yeah, sounds great.
I think my immediate goal is to run the Boston Marathon in April of next year.
Okay, sounds great. So we have one of our final important questions. Our podcast is about people who dare to dream. So what do you dare to dream? What future do you dare to imagine you're creating with the Oregon Entrepreneur Network?
Well, I mean, I'm going to dare to dream that we can actually have a diverse and inclusive entrepreneurial economy where access to capital is more equitable and folks can use entrepreneurship as a means of wealth creation for their family, and that people don't shy away from entrepreneurship in the face of much larger corporate conglomerations. Like, I want to continue, like, I'm going to dare to dream that being an individual business owner is something that folks want to continue to do for the long term.
It's a great dream.
Yeah.
And now I feel like it should be. It should be. Like your goal should not always be to get acquired by Facebook.
By a big company. Yeah.
Well, thank you for the conversation today, Cara. Really,
You're welcome. That was fun. It was so good to see you. How fun.
okay. Take care.
All right, we'll talk to you all later.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks to our guests today for their great insights on DARE, the podcast for innovators, entrepreneurs, and startup leaders. If you'd like your story to be featured on DARE, just contact us at info@darwaft.com. DARE is brought to you by Darwaft, the tech team that can make your vision a reality.